What that might be referring to is when I did the Grinch, I was literally the makeup was like being buried.
Jim Carrey's transformation into the Grinch became a holiday classic, but behind the green fur and prosthetics lies a nightmare of psychological torture, studio interference, and secrets so disturbing they were buried for over 2 decades. What you're about to discover will forever change how you watch this beloved film. Number 20. Jim Carrey nearly quit and had to be trained by a CIA torture specialist.
Hate, double hate.
Thick as we could make it in areas where I knew we could make it thicker, and it's actually tissue thin in many.
Jim Carrey experienced such severe psychological trauma from the 8-hour daily makeup application that he nearly quit the production multiple times, forcing Universal Studios to hire a CIA operative who specialized in training agents to resist torture to teach Carrey coping mechanisms to survive the process. The Grinch prosthetics, designed by legendary makeup artist Rick Baker, required Carrey to sit motionless in a chair for 8 hours every morning, while technicians glued foam latex pieces covering his entire face, head, and body. The process was claustrophobic, painful, and psychologically devastating. Carrey couldn't eat, drink, or use the bathroom during application. The materials itched constantly. The adhesives caused skin irritation and allergic reactions. By the 3rd day of production, Carrey was having panic attacks and told director Ron Howard he physically couldn't continue. Universal executives panicked. They'd invested over $120 million in the production and couldn't replace their star. Someone suggested hiring a specialist who trained military personnel to endure captivity. The studio contacted a former CIA operative who developed psychological techniques for agents captured and tortured. This specialist spent a week working with Carrey, teaching him meditation, dissociation techniques, and mental exercises used by prisoners of war to psychologically remove themselves from physical suffering. The training worked enough that Carrey could tolerate the makeup, but he later described the experience as like being buried alive every single day, and swore he'd never do another role requiring extensive prosthetics. Cast and crew members recalled Carrey emerging from makeup sessions, visibly traumatized, shaking, and sometimes crying. Rick Baker later admitted he felt guilty about what the process did to Carrey psychologically. Number 19. Ron Howard was not the original director.
Traditional. The problem with this movie, from a filmmaking standpoint, is that you couldn't.
Tim Burton was originally hired to direct How the Grinch Stole Christmas and spent over a year in pre-production, designing a much darker, gothic version of Whoville before Universal fired him for refusing to make the film more family-friendly and commercially safe. Burton's vision for the Grinch was nightmarish. He imagined Whoville as a twisted German expressionist landscape filled with grotesque creatures and unsettling imagery that would terrify children while entertaining adults. His concept art showed the Grinch as genuinely monstrous rather than comedically grumpy, and his Whoville residents as bizarre, almost alien, beings. Universal executives loved Burton's previous work on Beetlejuice and Batman, but grew increasingly concerned as his Grinch designs became darker and weirder. Studio head Casey Silver wanted a PG-rated family film that would sell merchandise and appeal to young children. Burton's version would likely receive a PG-13 rating and give kids nightmares. After months of creative disputes, Silver fired Burton and paid him his full directing fee to walk away quietly. Burton later said the firing was mutual. He realized Universal wanted something he couldn't deliver in good conscience. Ron Howard was hired specifically because his reputation for mainstream, accessible filmmaking promised a safer, more commercial product. Howard inherited Burton's production infrastructure, but scrapped all the gothic designs, starting over with a brighter, friendlier aesthetic. Burton's fired art director leaked some original concept drawings years later, showing a Grinch film that would have been radically different, darker, stranger, and possibly better than what Howard ultimately made. Some Burton fans believe Universal's decision to fire him and pursue commercial safety resulted in a more generic, less interesting film that sacrificed artistic vision for box office security. Number 18. The Grinch costume cost $250,000. Per day, the full Grinch costume required 92 separate pieces of foam, latex prosthetics, took a team of 12 technicians 8 hours to apply, cost approximately $250,000 per day in materials and labor, and had to be completely discarded and rebuilt fresh every single day because the adhesives and body heat destroyed the pieces after one use. Rick Baker's makeup design was the most complex and expensive ever created for a live-action film at that time. Each piece of the Grinch's face, forehead, cheeks, nose, chin, neck, was individually sculpted, molded, and painted. The green fur covering Carrey's body was yak hair hand tied to a spandex suit. Contact lenses gave him yellow eyes. Dental prosthetics changed his teeth. The hands required mechanical finger extensions. Every morning, technicians opened fresh boxes of prosthetic pieces, applied them to Carrey's face using medical-grade adhesive, blended the seams with more foam latex, airbrushed subtle color variations, and styled the facial hair. The process was so intricate that if any piece was applied incorrectly, they'd have to start over, costing hours and tens of thousands of dollars. At the end of each shooting day, everything was removed and thrown away. The body heat, sweat, and adhesive breakdown meant pieces couldn't be reused. Universal's accounting department calculated that the makeup alone cost over $18 million over the 92-day shooting schedule. That budget line item exceeded the entire production budget of many Hollywood films. Baker's team built a warehouse facility just to manufacture the daily Grinch pieces, employing over 40 full-time artists and technicians. The physical waste was staggering by production's end. They'd discarded literally tons of used prosthetics, creating an environmental nightmare that the studio quietly paid to dispose of properly. Number 17, Taylor Momsen was traumatized by Jim Carrey's method acting.
Grinch, my name is Cindy Lou Who.
Taylor Momsen, just 7 years old when she played Cindy Lou, who was repeatedly frightened to tears by Jim Carrey's aggressive method acting approach, where he remained in character as the hostile, angry Grinch even between takes, creating childhood trauma that Momsen later cited as a primary reason she left acting for her rock music career. Carrey approached the Grinch as a method role, believing that breaking character would make it harder to maintain the psychological darkness necessary for the performance. Between takes, he stayed in the makeup, stayed in the voice, and maintained the Grinch's misanthropic personality. For adult actors, this was merely intense. For 7-year-old Momsen, it was terrifying. She couldn't separate Jim Carrey from the Grinch character. When they weren't filming, he'd still growl at her, make threatening gestures, and refuse to acknowledge her as a frightened child who needed reassurance. Momsen's mother complained repeatedly to Ron Howard that Carrey was traumatizing her daughter. Howard spoke to Carrey about breaking character around the child actors, but Carrey insisted that coddling the kids would ruin the authentic fear he needed them to display on camera. The most disturbing incident occurred during the scene where the Grinch towers over Cindy Lou menacingly. Between takes, while waiting for lighting adjustments, Carrey remained looming over Momsen in character, occasionally snarling or making sudden movements that made her cry. Howard let it continue because Momsen's genuine fear made the scene more effective. Years later, Momsen discussed how the experience destroyed her love of acting and made her deeply suspicious of adults in the entertainment industry. She described feeling psychologically manipulated and used for cinematic effect without regard for her well-being. By age 14, she'd quit acting entirely, forming the rock band The Pretty Reckless and never returning to film. Number 16, Jeffrey Tambor and Jim Carrey had a violent physical altercation.
Uh-oh, somebody's fabulous!
Jeffrey Tambor and Jim Carrey got into a physical fight during the filming of the Whoville flashback sequence when Tambor became fed up with Carrey's method acting behavior and punched him in the face, breaking Carrey's nose and shutting down production for 4 days while both actors recovered and negotiated terms to continue working together. The flashback scenes required young Grinch to be bullied by young Augustus Mayhew, establishing their antagonistic relationship. During rehearsals, Carrey, in full Grinch makeup and character, began methodically mocking and belittling Tambor, supposedly to build genuine animosity between them. Tambor initially tolerated the behavior as typical actor preparation, but Carrey escalated, making personal attacks about Tambor's career, his physical appearance, and his acting ability. The insults continued between takes, during lunch breaks, and even when they weren't filming scenes together. Tambor repeatedly asked Carrey to stop. Carrey refused, claiming he needed to maintain authentic hatred. During one rehearsal, Carrey made a particularly cruel comment about Tambor's recent divorce. Tambor snapped, launching himself at Carrey and landing a solid punch to his face. The prosthetic nose absorbed some impact, but Carrey's actual nose broke beneath the makeup. Blood poured from Carrey's nostrils, and he fell backward. Security guards separated them before further violence erupted. Both actors were sent to separate medical facilities. Ron Howard spent the production shutdown, mediating between them. Universal's legal department drafted agreements requiring both actors to maintain professional distance and prohibiting further method acting provocations. When filming resumed, Tambor and Carrey spoke only when scenes required dialogue. Their tension remained visible in the final film, adding authentic antagonism to their characters' relationship, but creating a toxic set environment that affected everyone. Number 15. The film originally had a completely different score.
I never listen to my music again. Once I finish a film,
Composer James Horner spent 6 months creating an elaborate orchestral score for How the Grinch Stole Christmas that was completely discarded after test audiences hated it, forcing Universal to hire replacement composer Danny Elfman, with just 8 weeks before release to write an entirely new musical soundtrack from scratch. Horner, famous for his Titanic and Braveheart scores, approached The Grinch as an epic orchestral piece with complex themes and emotional depth. He recorded his score with a full symphony orchestra in London, spending over $3 million on the music. When Ron Howard assembled a test screening cut with Horner's music, audience response was catastrophic. Comment cards described the music as wrong, too serious, and not fun. The orchestral heaviness made the film feel like a drama rather than a comedy. The children were bored, parents were confused. Universal executives realized they had a massive problem. The film was scheduled for release during Thanksgiving weekend, and the score was fundamentally broken. Horner was devastated when told his work was being scrapped entirely. He offered to revise and rework themes, but Universal had lost confidence. They needed someone who understood whimsical, darkly comedic music. Danny Elfman, Tim Burton's frequent collaborator, was hired in September for a November release. Elfman worked 18-hour days composing, recording, and producing a completely new score in record time. His music emphasized playful darkness and cartoon-like energy that matched the film's tone perfectly. Elfman later called it the most stressful project of his career. Horner's original score has never been officially released, though bootleg recordings circulate among film music collectors. Some fans believe Horner's version was superior and that Universal panicked unnecessarily, while others agree the orchestral approach was completely wrong for the material. Number 14. Christine Baranski suffered a serious injury during the Whobilation scene. Christine Baranski shattered her ankle during the elaborate Whobilation sequence when she slipped on the ice-covered set, fell 12 feet off a platform, and landed badly, requiring emergency surgery that inserted 3 metal pins and forced her scenes to be reshot weeks later, using a stunt double for all physical movements. The Whobilation scene featured hundreds of extras dancing and celebrating in Whoville's town square. The set was decorated with fake snow and ice, creating treacherous conditions for performers in elaborate costumes and heels. Baranski wore 6-inch platform heels designed to exaggerate Martha May's height and glamour. During a complex choreographed sequence, Baranski had to dance across an elevated platform, spin, and pose dramatically. Rehearsals went perfectly. But during the actual take, with cameras rolling and hundreds of extras performing around her, Baranski's heel caught on a patch of slippery fake ice. She lost balance, tumbled sideways off the platform, and fell 12 feet onto the concrete floor below. The sound of her ankle breaking was audible even over the music and crowd noise. Filming stopped immediately. Baranski was screaming in pain, her foot bent at an unnatural angle. Paramedics arrived within minutes and administered emergency pain medication before transporting her to the hospital. X-rays revealed a compound fracture requiring immediate surgical intervention. Doctors inserted 3 metal pins to stabilize the shattered bones. Baranski spent 2 weeks in the hospital and months in physical therapy. Ron Howard had to shut down Martha May's remaining scenes while they waited for Baranski to recover enough to film close-ups and dialogue. All full-body shots and dancing sequences were reshot using a stunt double wearing Baranski's costume, with Baranski's face digitally composited in post-production for wider shots. The injury cost Universal over $2 million in production delays and digital effects work. Number 13. The Who children were kept in a separate location and monitored by child welfare officers.
We raised him like any other Who child, with a deep love of Christmas.
California. Child welfare authorities stationed full-time monitors on the How the Grinch Stole Christmas set after receiving anonymous complaints about unsafe working conditions for the dozens of child actors, implementing strict protocols that segregated children from adult actors during breaks and limited their exposure to Jim Carrey's method acting behavior. Over 60 children between ages 4 and 14 played various Who children throughout Whoville. Early in production, several parents complained that the set environment was psychologically unsuitable for young children. Jim Carrey's intense method acting frightened some kids. The dark, elaborate sets with grotesque decorations disturbed others. Long working hours violated child labor protections. The California Department of Industrial Relations investigated and assigned 2 full-time welfare officers to monitor every day of shooting. These officers implemented strict rules. Child actors had a separate holding area away from adult performers, worked limited hours with mandatory breaks, and were shielded from any behind-the-scenes chaos or adult behavior. When Jim Carrey was in full Grinch costume, children were briefed beforehand that he was pretending and that the real actor was friendly. Officers attended every scene involving children, ready to shut down production if protocols were violated. Ron Howard initially resented the oversight, feeling it implied he'd endanger children. But after witnessing some of Carrey's more intense moments, he acknowledged the precautions were necessary. Parents appreciated the protection, but some complained that the sterile, monitored environment made their children's performances less natural. The segregated setup created a strange dynamic where child actors experienced the production completely differently than adults, seeing only carefully managed, sanitized versions of the chaos happening elsewhere on set. Years later, several former child actors described feeling confused about what film they were actually making, having been so isolated from the production's darker elements. Number 12. Universal executives demanded The Grinch's backstory against Ron Howard's wishes. Ron Howard fought Universal executives for months to remove the Grinch's childhood backstory and bullying trauma subplot, believing it contradicted Dr. Seuss's original story and made the character too sympathetic. But the studio overruled him and mandated the flashback sequences remain to justify the Grinch's behavior for modern audiences. Dr. Seuss's original book never explained why the Grinch hated Christmas he just did. His heart was 2 sizes too small, and that ambiguity was part of the story's charm. Howard's initial script treatment honored that simplicity, but Universal's marketing department conducted extensive focus groups showing early footage to suburban families. The overwhelming feedback was that modern audiences needed to understand the Grinch's motivation. Parents wanted their children to see that meanness comes from pain. Child psychologists consulted by the studio recommended showing the Grinch as a bullying victim to teach anti-bullying messages. Universal executives mandated that Howard create an elaborate backstory, showing young Grinch being mocked for his appearance and rejected by Whoville society. Howard thought this fundamentally misunderstood Seuss's work. The Grinch wasn't meant to be a tragic figure requiring psychological justification. He was simply the antagonist who learns a lesson about community and joy. Making him sympathetic undermined the story's moral simplicity. Howard fought the mandate through multiple script revisions, but Universal held firm. The studio threatened to replace him if he couldn't deliver the backstory they wanted. Reluctantly, Howard filmed the flashback sequences, but deliberately made them brief and tonally disconnected from the rest of the film, hoping audiences would forget them quickly. Critics later agreed with Howard, noting that the backstory felt tacked on and unnecessary, contradicting Seuss's elegant simplicity with modern therapy, culture explanations that diminished the story's mythic quality. Number 11. The Whoville sets were toxic and made cast members ill. The massive Whoville sets were painted with toxic materials containing dangerous levels of lead, formaldehyde, and volatile organic compounds that made dozens of cast and crew members seriously ill throughout production, triggering an OSHA investigation and eventual lawsuit that Universal settled quietly for millions of dollars. The Whoville sets were the most elaborate ever constructed for a live-action film at the time, covering multiple sound stages with buildings up to 30 feet tall. Production designers used experimental paints and coatings to achieve the fantastical candy-colored aesthetic. These materials included industrial paints never intended for enclosed spaces, releasing fumes in the sealed sound stages. Within weeks of shooting, crew members began experiencing headaches, dizziness, and respiratory problems. Several collapsed on set. Jim Carrey, already suffering from the makeup ordeal, developed chronic coughing and breathing difficulties. Makeup artists working in close quarters with the sets reported nausea and skin irritation. Universal's insurance company sent industrial hygiene specialists to test the air quality. Results showed dangerously high levels of chemical vapors. OSHA launched a formal investigation, discovering that the paint products used contained lead-based pigments banned in residential applications, and formaldehyde levels exceeding safety limits by 300%. The production was forced to shut down for 2 weeks while specialized contractors stripped and repainted the entire set with approved materials. Over 40 cast and crew members filed workers' compensation claims for chemical exposure injuries. A class action lawsuit followed, with plaintiffs claiming permanent respiratory damage and neurological effects. Universal settled for an undisclosed amount, reportedly exceeding $15 million, paying for ongoing medical monitoring and treatment for affected workers. The incident led to stricter safety protocols for set construction throughout Hollywood. Number 10, Anthony Hopkins. Recorded narration, but was replaced at the last minute. Anthony Hopkins spent 3 days recording the entire narration for How the Grinch Stole Christmas in his distinctive voice, but Universal executives replaced him with a sound-alike voice actor after test audiences said Hopkins sounded too scary and serious for a family Christmas film. Hopkins approached the narration as dramatic literature, delivering Seuss's rhymes with Shakespearean gravitas and subtle menace. His voice brought weight and darkness that matched Jim Carrey's intense performance. But when test screenings played Hopkins' narration over the footage, parents complained it made the film feel threatening rather than whimsical. Children said the narrator sounded like a villain. Universal panicked and hired voice actor Anthony Geary to re-record everything in a lighter, friendlier tone. Hopkins was furious about being replaced, though his contract guaranteed full payment regardless. The studio destroyed Hopkins' recordings to prevent them from leaking. Years later, sound engineers who worked on the film claimed Hopkins' version was superior and more faithful to Seuss's slightly dark storytelling, but the studio prioritized commercial safety over artistic merit. Number 9, the Max animatronic dog cost $8 million. To create the animatronic Max dog required 2 years of development and cost over $8 million to design and build, making it the most expensive puppet ever created for a film. Yet Jim Carrey hated working with it and demanded real dogs be used whenever possible because the animatronic was too slow and unresponsive. Creature Effects Studio Rhythm and Hughes built multiple Max versions, a full animatronic capable of subtle facial expressions, several cable-controlled puppets for wide shots, and computerized versions for complex movements. The main animatronic required 6 puppeteers operating simultaneously to control eyes, ears, mouth, and body. Each take needed extensive preparation time as technicians programmed movements and adjusted mechanisms. Carrey, already frustrated by his own makeup ordeal, became increasingly impatient with Max's technical limitations. When the animatronic's eye mechanism broke during a crucial scene, delaying production for hours, Carrey exploded in rage and demanded Ron Howard use real dogs. Howard compromised, using trained dogs for simpler scenes and reserving the expensive animatronic for close-ups requiring specific expressions. Despite the astronomical cost, Max appears in relatively few scenes, making it one of the worst cost-to-screen time ratios in Hollywood history. Number 8, Audrey Geisel almost shut down the entire production. Audrey Geisel, Dr. Seuss's widow, who controlled his estate and had script approval rights, visited the set during production, and was so horrified by what she saw that she threatened to revoke Universal's rights and shut down the film entirely unless major changes were made immediately. Geisel had approved the script reluctantly, concerned about expanding her late husband's simple story into a feature-length film. But seeing the actual production shocked her. The grotesque makeup, the dark humor, the elaborate backstory, and Jim Carrey's manic performance felt nothing like Seuss's gentle morality tale. She spent one day on set watching filming and left visibly distressed. That night, her lawyers contacted Universal threatening legal action to halt production for breach of the adaptation agreement. Ron Howard and studio executives flew to her home for emergency negotiations. Geisel demanded substantial changes, less scary imagery, sweeter Who characters, and a more uplifting tone. Universal agreed to reshoot several scenes and adjust the ending to be more overtly heartwarming. The crisis cost over $3 million in reshoots and delayed the release. Geisel never publicly endorsed the finished film, and privately told friends she regretted allowing Hollywood to adapt her husband's work. Number 7. Jim Carrey was hospitalized 3 times during production. Jim Carrey was hospitalized 3 separate times during How the Grinch Stole Christmas filming, once for severe dehydration, caused by the costume preventing proper fluid intake, once for an allergic reaction to makeup adhesives that caused his face to swell dangerously, and once for a psychological breakdown that left him catatonic in his trailer for 6 hours. The Grinch costume was a physical nightmare. The foam latex prosthetics trapped heat and prevented sweat evaporation. Carrey couldn't drink water during the 8-hour application process or while in costume without ruining the makeup. On his first hospitalization, he collapsed on set after losing nearly 10 pounds of water weight in 5 hours under hot studio lights. The second incident occurred when his face developed a severe allergic reaction to new adhesive formulas, swelling so badly his eyes nearly closed. The third and most disturbing hospitalization happened during the final week of shooting, when Carrey's psychological state deteriorated so severely from months of daily torture that he essentially shut down mentally, sitting motionless and unresponsive until psychiatrists intervened. Each incident shut down production and cost hundreds of thousands in delays. Universal's insurance company considered canceling coverage, which would have killed the film. Carrey barely survived the production intact. Number 6. The film's original cut was nearly 3 hours long. Ron Howard's first assembly cut of How the Grinch Stole Christmas ran 2 hours and 48 minutes, featuring extensive subplots about Who politics, elaborate musical numbers, and dark comedy sequences that Universal executives demanded be cut by over an hour to create a commercially viable family film. Howard had shot enormous amounts of footage, building a complex world far beyond Dr. Seuss's simple story. The original cut included a 20-minute political subplot about Mayor Mayhew's corrupt administration, multiple songs that Audrey Geisel found too adult-oriented, and darker scenes showing the Grinch's genuine cruelty that test audiences found disturbing. When Universal screened the nearly 3-hour version, executives immediately demanded massive cuts. The film needed to be under 110 minutes to allow more daily theater showings and maximize box office revenue. Howard spent 3 months in intensive editing, removing entire subplots and character arcs. The cuts created continuity problems requiring additional pickup shots. The final film feels rushed and incomplete because whole sections were removed. Some deleted material has appeared on special edition releases, but over 90 minutes of finished footage remains locked in Universal's vaults. Howard later expressed frustration that studio mandates forced him to sacrifice character development for runtime. Number 5. The production bankrupted multiple special effects companies. The technical demands and budget overruns of How the Grinch Stole Christmas financially destroyed 3 separate special effects. Companies contracted for the film, forcing them into bankruptcy when Universal refused to pay for cost. Overruns the studio claimed weren't authorized. The elaborate Whoville sets, prosthetics, and creature effects required unprecedented resources and technical innovation. Multiple effects houses bid aggressively on various elements, underestimating the complexity and expense. One company responsible for background, Who characters manufactured thousands of prosthetic pieces that Universal rejected for not meeting quality standards. The company had already spent its entire budget and couldn't afford to remake everything. Universal refused additional payment, citing contract terms. The company declared bankruptcy within months. A second effects house working on the sleigh sequences experienced similar problems when technical requirements kept changing and costs spiraled beyond estimates. They too went bankrupt during post-production. A third company making animatronic background elements folded when Universal disputed invoices and withheld payment. All three bankruptcies involved lawsuits eventually settled out of court. The industry viewed Universal's hardball tactics as ruthless, creating lasting resentment. The bankruptcies put hundreds of specialized craftspeople out of work and contributed to consolidation in the effects industry. Number 4. Cindy Lou's mom was digitally replaced in every scene. Molly Shannon filmed the entire role of Betty Lou. Who, Cindy Lou's mother, but Universal executives hated her performance so much, they digitally replaced her face in every single scene using groundbreaking CGI technology, essentially erasing Shannon from the film while keeping her body movements. Shannon's comedic style clashed with Ron Howard's vision for the character. Her performance was broader and more satirical than Howard wanted, playing Betty Lou as oblivious and slightly dim. After filming Wrapped, test audiences found her annoying and distracting. Universal faced a dilemma. Reshooting all Betty Lou scenes would cost millions and require reassembling cast and elaborate sets. Instead, they hired a visual effects company to pioneer digital face replacement. They hired actress Molly Quinn to film Betty Lou's close-ups separately against green screen, then digitally composited her face onto Shannon's body in every scene. The technology was primitive compared to modern standards, and some shots look slightly off if you know what to watch for. Shannon discovered what happened only at the premiere when she saw someone else's face on her body. She received full payment and screen credit but was devastated and humiliated. She refused to discuss the film publicly for years, later calling it the most painful professional experience of her career. Number 3. Universal added product placement against Dr. Seuss, estate objections. Universal Studios secretly inserted over 30 brand name products into the film's Whoville scenes to generate additional revenue through product placement deals, directly violating agreements with Dr. Seuss's estate that prohibited commercialization of his characters and worlds. Audrey Geisel had specifically negotiated contract terms preventing the Grinch film from including real-world brands, believing commercialization would corrupt her husband's artistic legacy. But Universal's marketing department negotiated millions in product placement deals anyway, having lawyers insert loopholes claiming background, set decoration didn't constitute endorsement. Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and other major brands paid for subtle appearances in Whoville shops and homes. The insertions were done during post-production, without Ron Howard's knowledge. When Geisel's representatives saw an advanced screening and noticed brand names, they immediately threatened legal action. Universal argued the placements were so brief and background that they didn't violate contract terms. The dispute nearly went to court before Universal agreed to digitally remove or obscure the most obvious brands and paid the Seuss estate an undisclosed settlement. However, careful viewing of the film still reveals several brand names that remain visible in background shots, evidence of Universal's commercial exploitation that Geisel fought against unsuccessfully. Number 2, the film's release was delayed 6 months due to visual effects. Problems? How the Grinch Stole Christmas was originally scheduled for Christmas 1999, but was delayed 6 months until November 2000 because the visual effects companies couldn't complete the necessary CGI work on Universal's rushed timeline, creating a production crisis that nearly caused the film to miss the holiday season entirely. Ron Howard's ambitious vision required over 1,000 visual effects, shots, digital set extensions, composited backgrounds, enhanced creature performances, and seamless integration of practical and computer-generated elements. The effects work was vastly more complex than estimated. Multiple companies worked simultaneously on different sequences, but technical problems compounded as deadlines approached. Software crashed repeatedly. Rendering took longer than predicted. Quality control revealed hundreds of shots needing rework. By mid-1999, Universal realized the film couldn't possibly be ready for Christmas release. Delaying to the following summer would miss the holiday market entirely, so they pushed to November 2000, giving effects teams another year. Even with the extra time, the final months involved crushing crunch conditions with artists working 100-hour weeks to finish shots. Several effects houses nearly collapsed from the pressure. Some finished shots were delivered just days before the film's theatrical premiere. The delay cost Universal millions in rescheduled marketing and lost revenue from missing the 1999 holiday season. Number 1, Jim Carrey secretly negotiated his contract. To prevent sequels, Jim Carrey secretly negotiated a clause in his How the Grinch Stole Christmas contract that gave him complete veto power over any sequels, effectively guaranteeing that he would never have to endure the makeup torture again, and preventing Universal from continuing the franchise despite the film's massive box office success. When Carrey's agents negotiated his $20 million salary, they included buried contract language giving him final approval over any sequel scripts, directors, and production terms. Universal executives barely noticed the clause, assuming Carrey would welcome returning to such a profitable franchise. But Carrey's traumatic experience made him determined never to repeat the ordeal. When the film grossed over $345 million worldwide, Universal immediately wanted a sequel. They developed scripts, hired writers, and announced production plans. Then they discovered Carrey's contract gave him absolute veto power. He refused every pitch, every script, and every financial offer, including a reported $50 million payday. Universal tried to work around him by developing animated sequels or prequel stories, but the Seuss estate contract required Carrey's participation for any live-action follow-up. The franchise was essentially dead because one actor refused to be tortured again. Universal lost potential billions in sequel revenue because they didn't read contract fine print carefully. Those are 20 devastating secrets that expose the nightmare behind the Grinch's green smile. Jim Carrey's torture, on-set violence, bankruptcies, and studio deception created a holiday classic built on suffering. If these revelations shocked you, smash that like button and subscribe. Share with fellow Grinch fans and drop your thoughts in the comments below.